I'm also thinking for this whole week, trying to understand what had to be done with us, with Ukrainians, so that the main appeal to the nation would be to come back to reality. And also, that would be the most punishable slogan in the country. How do you become a political dissident in Ukraine today? You just need to state that you need to be realistic and to look at the events as they unfold realistically. And then your life really changes quickly. So, this is a serious syndrome. The disease has gone a long way, and it's about time for us to recover. And you've been naming several Russian territories in your analysis. They got a message. They just got a task from Putin to start building UAVs in each of them, and they have about 80 plus of these regions. So imagine how many UAVs they'll be manufacturing. So I would repeat once again, it would be good if we came back to reality. Alexei, and finishing the topic of publication of Richard Haas in Foreign Affairs, we do understand that Kiev demonstrates the wish to continue with the offensive. Remember the statements from Kiev that not everything is so doom and gloom. This is not a stalemate at the front. There are still options. We see today that there is Lloyd Austin is visiting Kiev with official visit. We're seeing Cavoli, the commander of American military forces in Europe, Minister of Finance also visits us. Do you think they can bring our military political leadership to the reality? How do you see that? I'm skeptical. But I'm also seeing the package that they brought to help us 100 millions, one HIMARS machine. This is a very small Christmas present compared with everything we were getting until now. This is a very modest one. So it was probably an option. It was very uncomfortable to come without gifts, so they got the smallest they could. And which offensive can one talk about at that time? This is a big mystery for me. It can be a political slogan, right? It could be a legal slogan, right? Of course. But it cannot be a strategic slogan. It cannot be a slogan for the front. If Haas can separate these signals and these realities and lay out the path, why our military political leadership still cannot? And of course, you can separate that. We'll never give our lands. We have our political position. We're never giving our lands to the border of 1991. We always will be on pursuit of regaining those territories, and we will be filing legal proceedings against Russia everywhere we can. And that's one part, one aspect. And then in reality, you have that much military forces. You can maybe get Avdiivka, get to hold it, and then maybe get Tekmak, but both are not really being achieved at the moment. And perhaps one should sit down and figure, okay, maybe we need to change the strategy a bit. And if the task is not solvable with current resources, then you need to come to the senses and understand what can you do with current resources, and then perhaps start the conversation with our society at large, discussing what can we do. Over 60% of our citizens believe that we will reach the borders of 1991, and they hush everybody who doesn't agree with them. But in reality, guys, this is unobtainium at the moment. And our leadership knowing, absolutely knowing that they cannot get to those borders right now with the resources we have, they continue putting that on a shield as a slogan. And then people down in the country everywhere, they're saying, well, our president is saying we can, then why should we care about Haas? Why should we care about allies? Why should we care about what these three guys are talking in their streams? But whose responsibility resting upon? The fact that most of population in our country continue to believe in absolutely unattainable plans. And now there is interesting material conflict that starts to bubble up. In Kharkov and Kiev, the journalists come to citizens walking the streets and they're asking, hey, do you guys support us getting to the borders of 91? Sure, yes, we'll fight to those borders. But if we give you mobilization rate. Would you go to the front right now to achieve these goals? Oh, no, no, I have conditions, I have other business, I cannot do it at the moment. So this difference is growing, and this exacerbates the dead end and the floor that's tilting further and further in that dead end. Right, I can confirm here that our citizens definitely are watching the central signal, so they are under the influence of whatever is being pushed by the military political leadership of the country. Right, you can imagine how disappointed they will be when this message will change. And if you start bringing them to reality, starting from the central signal, from our leadership, then people perhaps can find ways to accommodate that, to come to senses with current realities. And it will be difficult, but I think it's possible still. And by the way, we are in touch with military a lot. Right now, we're running that fundraiser for 110th Brigade. We are trying to raise money for them for everything. They need drones, they need all kinds of UAVs, they need construction materials, they need nails, they need brackets, they need shoes, warm shoes for winter, they need radioelectronic defense measures. And all that is not enough, what they get, what they have there in the front. There is deficit for all of that. So what is the prognosis in this current material supply level for our troops to continue? Well, okay, let me take it upon myself, and I'll take this difficult role of the dissident who says the truth and gets the stones. So if you look at this article, there's no signal about joining NATO. You cannot see NATO in there. So the plan that the West is suggesting now, via Haas and the like, is that Ukraine can get expedited access to European Union. They can get support and they can get some guarantees from the NATO countries, but not NATO membership already. And it would be strange if they actually would be talking about NATO, because even now Hungary and Turkey still have some qualms with Sweden and the new members. So a year ago, we could generally find agreement with NATO to make sure we join them in some capacity, follow that Kissinger suggestion and the like. And right now, NATO is already off the table. We're seeing other guarantees. Half a year later, what will happen there? What will be offered to us then? In the meantime, Russia will be hitting our infrastructure during this winter. They will continue. And of course, they will be preparing another offensive that will probably start next spring, either before presidential elections or right after them, somewhere connected to that event. And if the Western military aid will be in a drip fashion, just like it is now, it will be very difficult for us to hold territories, to hold the front. We actually might be looking then at losing more territories, and some people who are living on Ukraine land might find themselves on the occupied territories next year. Are we getting ready for that? Are we discussing that? Are we preparing our military? Are we digging the Surovikin line for ourselves? Are we buying more drones? Are we building military production for the UAVs? And my answer is negative. Perhaps I don't know something, but in this case, if reality is not happening from the signals of our major leadership, then reality will start bringing itself to you on the ground. And it'll be a very painful farewell to all the illusions. And those people who are saying, yes, we'll fight to 1991 borders and we'll win, they might meet next spring somewhere near Avdiivka on the front line. And there'll be nobody to appeal to. They'll have to blame themselves because they were believing their main leadership and avoiding reality the way it was knocking on the door all the time. I do not see a positive scenario in 2024 for Ukraine, the real positive one. Perhaps there may be some black swan events, the skies will open and everything will change, but I am not seeing yet. I do not see it neither in case we freeze this conflict, nor if we continue protracting this hot fighting on the front. There'll be different consequences, but they'll be mostly negative in both cases. Listen, Alexei, I want to accentuate another element of this strategy, that Ukraine shouldn't stay passive, looking at what's happening, what Haas and the others are saying. Ukraine actually should be taken into NATO in its current condition, and they were discussing that as a probability. But our key element, our key goal for this war is to find the better positions that we can, because the formula of Rasmussen is more attractive than the formula of Haas when you're getting some guarantees, right? But the central message that you read through his article, refusing to discuss this reality, is we are losing the better options that exist now, that there's still some forces in the West very supportive of, but we are refusing to discuss that, and we are going deeper and deeper in a rabbit hole until we finally open the window of discussion and window of probabilities, but it might be too late for all these better options. And in the meantime, we need to be working, we must be fighting for our better position, but we are not. And people who actually wish a better scenario for us, if somehow we manage to score that, I would say that would be a divine intervention. But I maybe give it 1.5% at the current moment. And the main reason is that our position is rather stubborn, that no, we won't even discuss that. And while we're not discussing, another good scenario is being dumped. The next bullet is in a clip, and it's not as good as the last one. If we will skip this one, the next one will be a bit worse. And it affects the exact desire and exact numbers of aid that are being supplied to Ukraine. We look like stubborn flock, and our allies are looking at us thinking, well, how can we be helping them if they just neglect us and don't want to hear what we're telling them? So I'm remembering events of a 100-year-old story with Getman Skoropadsky and that power that was ruling Ukraine between 1917 and 1920. I will remind our viewers that we can take very precious lessons from Skoropadsky. In one of the previous streams, we did talk about his visit early in September in 1918 to Germany, got some guarantees, got promises that Ukraine military will be outfitted, and then in 3 months everything crumbles, Germany loses the war, and Skoropadsky finds himself in a very different context, in a very different scenario. Turns out that everything that he was building the future of the country on has evaporated as smoke. And what does he start to do? He understands that he is now without army, with a very weak government machine, facing the threat of another Bolshevik attack, and they were preparing to attack Ukraine at that time. There were not enough weapons, and internally they already had some mutinies with Dyachenko and the others. So these mutinies start popping up here and there, and he starts to think, how can he save his country? So what is he doing? He is sending a message to Cossacks, to the River Don, to the White Army detachments, who are still at this point fighting for indivisible and united Russian Empire, guys like Denikin. And he's sending a message there saying, guys, we need to unite in the face of Bolshevik threat. And that internally was also attacked as a weak position, as one of the reasons that Skoropadsky needs to be removed because of. And as a result, they lost to Bolsheviks. And all these Cossacks, Kuban, Donetsk, Denikin, Petlura, Skoropadsky, they all have lost. And Makhno and Zeleny. And why? Because they failed to determine the main priority threat in this time, which were Bolsheviks, just like Skoropadsky was telling them. And later he, in his memoirs, mentioned that, to our horror, Lenin turned out to be the most momentous figure that was birthed by the moment and that acted at the time. So what actually comes out of this story that you're telling, that we should be remembering as a nation? It's a very important rule that I like mentioning. And it sounds like this: the changes accumulate gradually, but realize drastically, rapidly. And of course, nobody will leave us without aid completely, but the amount of aid is decreasing. And bit by bit, everything accumulates, and then at some point we will not have enough resources, and the back will be broken. You just will have nothing to do at this moment. We are already in the funnel of a catastrophe, but we're not too deep in that. There are still some options available for us. Nikolay, can you read a message today from Stefanchuk? And I'll explain further. And that tells you about the level of our higher military political leadership. And after that, you won't be just skeptic, you'll be super skeptical. So the head of our parliament, Stefanchuk, he is a lawyer, right? Yeah, supposedly of a higher level, the head of legislature. He is saying that there are no Russian national minorities in Ukraine and their rights can be diminished. The law for national minorities is not to cover Russians. Representatives of Russian nationality cannot have any representation in Ukraine. And he is referring to Venetian Commission here. And let's take a look, more detailed one. He's saying Russian people is conducting an aggression against Ukraine. I want to send him to the international definition of aggression, that is the way it is understood by United Nations. And international law has priority over the Ukrainian law. And this law says that it's only the government who can be an aggressor against the other government. People cannot be an aggressor. Now, in Russia, there are over 200 different nationalities, and a big part of them is matching with the same peoples that we have in Ukraine. And not to offend anybody, but imagine if somebody is an Armenian or Azerbaijan descent fighter is fighting for Putin on the front with us. Does it mean that Armenia and Azerbaijan minorities should also have no rights in Ukraine because some of their representatives are participating in the aggression of Russia against Ukraine? This statement is a screaming collection of legal nonsense. And this is the head of our legislature. And he's actually aiming at splitting our society. He's violating the same article that Farion did, that we discussed in a couple streams. That tells you immediately that these people have no control over what they're doing. Remember my judgment that they're at the limit of their competence? They are. They are taking cases and trying to solve them that they cannot even understand. And they're not even thinking strategically in this case. Because on the background of war, this is a horrible statement. Let's say, without definition, certain national group has to be defeated in their rights inside the country. The last time that happened was in the 30th in Germany, in the last century. Well, Stalin also liked to do the same to national groups and to exile them within Soviet Union. So he is basically pushing, the head of Ukrainian legislature is pushing Stalin-Hitler politics, and nothing. So one thing is when the power is doing these crazy stunts, but then the other is that society is not giving any evaluations to that. We, of course, will continue our efforts. We will be biting the power of society, indicating at the mistakes, but I'm a very big skeptic. I think this all will end in a big crisis, in a serious crisis in a very short historical time frame. Yeah, the problem is that if he was just one of those politicians who represents a certain district, and there are different representatives in parliament, right? They use different words, but he's a doctor of judicial sciences. He's a professor, he's an academician, he is the member of legal academy. He was a well-known attorney. And imagine him now as an attorney after what he said about the minorities. I think he had to give a different position. I think whatever he said, that's a total failure. It's difficult to comment that one. And sorry, colleagues, we've been live for about an hour already. An important commentary here. Sorry, Nikolay, in my chat. Stefanchuk is saying that we don't have national minority because we have Russian-speaking people in Ukraine, but we don't have national minority. They're a big group of people. Well, here's the problem. When you launch that like this, you start a whole stir of crap that people will start pushing left and right. And if he would just not said that, that would be a much better situation. Just like with Farion, when she actually triggered a lot of military members with her statements. And right after the statement, Russians will, of course, use that statement. Russian propaganda will be using his statements. They'll be using that to discombobulate our society and try to also crack the inner unity of Ukraine. The statement that you just read about not having a minority is kind of on par with Stefanchuk's statement. So Stefanchuk comes out and says, we will be defeating and damaging the rights of national minorities. He makes a public acknowledgement of that. Alexei, he just doesn't recognize that as a minority. He's saying there are no Russian national minorities in Ukraine. Right, in one place he acknowledges the existence of it, on the other he denounces. He's saying that representatives of this minority are in military aggression against us and they will not get anything from us, and that minority doesn't even exist. So he, as a logicizing fellow, has unlocked some interesting achievements here. And I will not even bring up the Venetian Commission here, but people who are coming to comment on this are saying, well, we don't have it. We don't have this minority. So this is the tip of the Jamalungma mountain of Ukrainian politics. This is the peak achievement. If in United Nations anybody could grab that topic, I know Russian Nebenza will definitely grab on this, but just imagine unknown group or the speaker of a parliament of European country comes out and says, we will diminish the rights of a certain national minority, and we also, by the way, don't have that minority. So, colleagues, what are you hoping for? Do you think these people will start navigating masterfully between Scylla and Charybdis, will find a way to negotiate with Americans to win the argument between Republicans and Democrats and their attitude to us, will win the likes of Trump supporters to support Ukraine? You seriously think that they'll do that? I'm not hoping that they even will make a school-level sentences. And this all seems like it might end rather badly in a very short historic perspective. And then we'll have, once this political, as you were saying, second Ukrainian Republic will crumble, we'll have to expeditiously create something more livable to save our dear Ukraine, because we have the same Bolsheviks now attacking us, and it's not just a detachment of Muravyov. We have 400,000 on the front. And that's it. We also have the article by Biden. It was announced in our description of the stream, so maybe we quickly touch on that. The key element there is about Israel, is about two countries who need to find the formula, and there is no better time than now to do that, to start these discussions. Biden is seriously hoping, or at least makes a statement to that effect, that these negotiations will continue and will bring a more stable situation in the Middle East as a result, and on Palestinian territories in general. He is talking about the corridor, India, Saudi Arabia, Israel, European Union, that was mentioned in G20, was supposed to bring more stability and more peace, but Hamas actually provoked and targeted this agreement. He did mention that directly. Yes, Yury, you have a note here. Look, the core message of Biden, it actually coincides with Haas and the other guys are saying. He is talking about adapting to new realities. And what is he saying about Israel? He doesn't really say much about Ukraine. There he actually uses good supportive words that will be supporting Ukraine, aggressor should not be allowed to win, etc., and violate international law. But regarding Israel, there are a lot of concrete things that are very painful for both Palestinians and Israelis, because the stakes are so high there that Israel doesn't want the Palestinian state to appear on their territory. Let's call it what it is. and they were slowing down this process during the last decades. And Palestinians, supported by many countries in Muslim world, starting with Iran, they are posing a question still that Israel needs to be completely annihilated. And that's why Biden, the main message in his article is that the world and the order will not show in that area until there will be a Palestinian state that will have no blockades, no limitations, will be a real subject, a sovereign state. And Israel, on the other hand, will get guarantees that the Gaza sector cleaned from Hamas and the Western Bank of Jordan will stop being such a big problem. So Palestinians can get the state they're dreaming to have, and Israel will get certain security that they're trying to achieve, and for which they're spending so much resources in the race for. So this is the main message of his message. And the rest is lyrics. And he's talking about compromise that leaders of Israel and leaders of the Muslim world need to find. Because he's representing in this message not only Palestinians, but also Morocco, Saudi Arabia, Iran, all different Muslim countries of the region. And he is suggesting for them to start looking for the formula that might create a more stable construct than the one they had for 70 plus years, and which failed to solve the problem neither for Israel nor for Palestine. So that's what it's about. If Haas is talking about the need of a realistic strategy for Ukraine, in our case, then Biden's article is basically suggesting a same realistic strategy search for Israel and Palestine. That's why we noticed this article. And there is also Taiwan on the horizon, right? The situation there will also be one of the triggers for the forming of the New World Order. So the problems are rather similar, and the instruments are similar. We need to feel the spirit of times, basically, and to act following the spirit of times. Alexei, what do you say? Right? We found ourselves in a state when an 81-year-old president of the United States at his birthday is posting an article imploring a lot of countries to come back to reality. Israel, meanwhile, is not ready for any Palestine state, won't even discuss that, perhaps as they will be resolving the problem with Hamas. And then after that, there'll be, of course, a discussion about returning these territories to Palestinian management, and that's basically a Palestinian state. So that is definitely on the horizon. And Biden was highlighting that the United States is not ready to alienate 1.5 billion Muslims on the planet. And he's suggesting that Israel needs to be more negotiable, and if they want to achieve their goals and if they want to have American support. So I guess we can say happy birthday, Joe, and thank you for message to try to bring everything back to reality. I think this situation is worthy of a psychiatrist, frankly. We do have Zelenin, Khamyak, Litzuk, philosophers in our streams, and myself. We keep talking about that, but if you make 2 steps away from the problem, you actually are looking at a psychiatric problem, not a geopolitical problem. We just have patients in different countries, different size countries, but the patients refuse to take reality the way it is. And they're in different phases. Somebody is propitiating, somebody is acceptance, somebody is in aggression, but they still refuse to. This is not geopolitics, this is geopsychology. That means, I guess, our streams will be geopsychological streams. Well, that kind of flows into psychiatric diagnosis over many countries. If we analyze this data that we talked about right before we started the stream, that starting February 24th of 22, Ukraine got over $230 billion of international aid. Most of that was donated by EU and United States, over 70% of that whole volume. And with all that, countries of Europe also paid 180 billions of euro to Russia for all kinds of mineral resources. And Russia in general made on exports of coal, oil, and other metals a very comparable amount. So yeah, this is part of schizophrenia, right? Exactly. We are fighting here, we are trading there, and we are giving means to the one who is attacking one of our allies to continue their war. Now, the 12th package of sanctions, if they actually will start diminishing the opportunities for the Grey Fleet, that will likely affect Russian economy and also the factories that supply the programmable machines for the factories in Russia. But again, this will be a smaller effect, and it likely will be reimbursed by sales of oil, gas, coal, other things. But this is how the world works. We don't get it in Ukraine that Russians can be 3 times the heathens, but they're the heathens with resources. And our allies will be going there for these resources, and Russia will be building their influence based on these resources and would be influencing their politics around the world. And we are heathens with what? With nothing. So we likely will be used as a resource. They're heathens with a resource, and we are heathens which are a resource, which behave like a resource. Yury actually formulated a while ago that we do behave as a food at the big table, with a big chance of actually going down the leftovers tray the way we're doing it now. So we should wisen up quite a bit. Since we don't have resources, our main resource is here, in the head. Adequate behavior. We need to be suggesting solutions that are a level above, or at least adequate, to the ideas that our allies in the West are suggesting, and the coalition that we want to join on the official level. They're screaming at us, trying to appeal to us to come back to our senses, and we find it beneath us to even answer that. And in Ukraine, every time there is an article somewhere in the West, they attack this article. The Western analytics are showing that, guys, you cannot even take Tokmak in your counteroffensive, but then our secretaries of national security representing Lugansk School of Geopolitics, which probably almost as good as London School and Paris School in his opinion, and they start to make statements that you guys are idiots on the West. You don't understand our specificity. We will get to the borders, we will cross the borders without even drawing direct dependency between these statements that they make and diminishing aid from the West and diminishing trust to our adequacy, to our capability in general to adequately gauge the reality, and to the floor of our dead end, which keeps tilting and tilting, where we are put and driven by our political leadership, which is now being appealed to by our allies to change their position. So we, on the other hand, not only broke that glass ball, we just keep hitting ourselves on the head with it. And perhaps let's leave it to our viewers to gauge the perspectives of such a behavior. I don't have reasons to object, Alexei, and I just remind that today we're gathering money. Right, soldier needs to have resources, regardless of what the political fight is. Very often people are saying that, what can I change? I can only send 10 hryvnias maybe. But I would say even 1 hryvnia is important, because soldiers that are running the fundraiser, they see how money drip into their account. The money, of course, matters, but they also see the support. He is sitting there somewhere in a trench mixed with snow, rain, mud, and blood, but he sees your support. Every hryvnia that falls on their account is an expression of support and love to the soldier from you guys. Thank you, soldier. Thank you, soldier. And when he sees that, he gets more motivation to continue fighting even the most difficult fight. He sees that this is what he is fighting for. If you can't send 10, just send 1. Just send a signal to the soldier. We do remember about you. We do support you. I'm with you. And thank you for you standing there for us. So yeah, if you can't do 10, just do 1. But please support that fundraiser for 110th Brigade and the others that we'll be announcing in our streams. All right, colleagues, thank you, gentlemen, for that stream. We will announce whenever the next one will happen, supposedly next Monday. And goodbye and have a quiet night.